It's Tuesday. You already know what time it is. It's R3's time where we read. I'm Naila. I'm your CEO and your founder of R3, where eyes, where lives, real lives, where we promote knowledge of self through education and activism. And what better way to do that than to read, write, and comprehend for your own understanding. So, of course, we're going to jump right into it. I was running a little late, but we're always on time. Never forget, R3 uses your real eyes. We are reading we're finishing up reading the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina Coup d'etat by David B. McCoy. This book has been a breath of fresh air, I should say, because some of the things that I already was thinking of, like the Tulsa, Oklahoma riot, which was in 1921, this was the precursor to all of the violence and Jim Crow laws that happened to African Americans after the emancipation, and that actually continues to happen. So we'll be discussing a little bit of that and relieving ourselves with probably some things that we might have thought we were crazy about, but it was definitely a precursor to a lot of the violence that took place. So we should have actually finished out the book. I'm going to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest. How so? She is here on Cruise Life, but remember, the Real Book Club reads regardless. But I'm pretty sure she'll tell you. I'll go ahead and pass it over to her, and she will let you know a little bit more.
I was so the hostess with the mostest. Now, I do have a video you can still play. Coming at you from the Cruise Line, region. Bleh. I don't know if Melody won, but I did send her the text.
She's on. She's on.
We're reading the 1898 one. I was going to say massacre, but it's pretty close to it. But the coup d'etat, that is a successful coup d'etat in the United States. And history books have sanitized that coup to say that it was a race riot. There was no race riot. It was a bunch of armed bandits, criminals, socialist races who decided to march upon the duly elected biracial, black and white, legally elected government, and tear and burn it down by burning down black businesses and running black people out of the state, as well as white people who they felt they were not sympathizing with the cause of the races. They were precursors to the KKK getting full steam also. So, like I said, history has sanitized it as a race riot. It was not a race riot. It was a bunch of dudes who marched and overthrew the government that was duly elected. Anyway, I'm Pablo, where our threes and reaches every Tuesday. Our time does change because we are like water and we flow. So today we're here out to 6. And you can get us at our Real Eyes, or you can get us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and the YouTube channel. You can also get to our website where you can see our campaigns that we have going on, donations, drive-by, feed the homeless, the unhoused. We have to use the correct terminology for their dignity. Also, feed the unhoused. We have a scholarship opportunity to donate whatever you need. We are 501c, and we donate $1 to $1 million, whatever you fancy, and the money will go directly toward whatever cause you need, because we are here for the community. Again, this is that our Real Lives. I won't be able to be here long because I am floating in the middle of the ocean, but I did want to make my presence known, and especially with these elections coming up, November 5th, there's a thread. We saw the Klan rally, the Trump rally that he had the other day, which was akin to a can rally for all the people that talked about the Puerto Ricans, blacks and watermelons, garbage, whatever else they said. It was basically akin to a Klan rally. So we need to get up on the history, but we are not repeating at our three real lives. That's usually.
All right. Melody, do you want to add anything for your summary or of the book?
I think that it's just scary and gives me like horrible goosebumps to see the repetition. It's still here. The same things that they were doing, like you said, then they're doing the same things now politically. The same kind of rhetoric against black and brown people from everywhere. Apparently now, where everybody's bad if you're not white, according to the new Republican Party. Scary.
Right.
So we have to vote. That's what I want to say.
Okay. Good. Okay, yeah, agreed. And that's what I meant to, just so people out there, a breath of fresh air, meaning I'm not crazy. Because a lot of things that we talk about now, about politics or racism and discrimination, a lot of people like to say, you're pulling the race card. But this book is clearly showing us that it was not a race card that we're pulling when we talk about no justice, no peace. And we need freedom, and we need the right to vote without being harassed, without being killed, without being discriminated against simply for the color of our skin or because our political influence that we might have. This book shows us a lot of it, and it is a precursor. We'll read about that briefly, but it is a precursor to a lot of the massacres and riots that have happened here in America, probably too across the world, because we also read that book, The Americans Are Coming. So we had a lot of influence around the world as well with us fighting back. So I wanted to start off on page 29. It just gives the description so we don't have to read it all the way through because we've read the book, right? So on page 29, it gives the description of the melee as it was told by white supremacists. So I just want us to be able to read it in their perspective to see how they sanitize it. Like our hostess said, sanitize the information just like the history books. Also, if you found at the end of the chapter when it was coming up to how many black African Americans were murdered and killed by these red shirts, the white supremacists said, oh, about 20. But then there was an account with a lot of other people saying, I think it was 90. And then a lot of the African Americans who are used to using word of mouth said it was over 300 people. So just seeing that drastic amount from the white supremacists doing the violence to people who are actually the ones getting the violence and watching their loved ones go, and to the people in the middle, it was clearly biased, and it was clearly discriminatory because they didn't see them as humans. They see them as property. So 20 people were killed, so what, whatever. So on page 29, it kind of gives us a description of the white supremacists of their melee, they called it. So it says, then the red shirts began to ride and the Negroes began to run. That stuck out to me there. You begin to ride and we run. The Africans, or at least those Negroes who had foolishly believed in the remote possibility of social equality with the former masters of their parents, began to slink before the Caucasians. They, the Negroes, appeared to turn primal, slicking away like tigers at bay. And remember, this is the white supremacists talking, snarling as they retreated before the bristling bayonets, barking, guns, and flaming red shirts. And that was by Harry Hayden in 1936. And then a description of the melee as told by a Negro from Wilmington says, firing began, and it seemed like a mighty battle in wartime. The shreks and screams of children, of mothers, of wives were heard, such as caused the blood of the most inhumane person to creep. Thousands of women, children, and men rushed to the swamps, and there lay upon the earth in the cold to freeze and starve. The streets were dotted with their dead bodies. Some of their bodies were left lying in the streets until up in the next day following the riot. All the white people had gone out of that part of the city where the violence was occurring, and an army of men marched through the streets, sword buckled to their sides, giving the command to fire. They went from house to house looking for Negroes that they considered offensive, took arms they had hidden and killed them for at least the expression of manhood. They gathered around colored homes, firing like great sportsmen firing at rabbits in an open field. And when one would jump his man, from 60 to 100 shots would be turned loose upon him. His escape was impossible. One fellow was walking along a railroad and they shot him down without any provocation. That word. And that was by J. Allen Kirk, November 10th, 1898. So if we see the differences in the story from the perpetrators to the ones that are being attacked, it's very, very different. The white supremacists are like, it's no big deal. We just kind of went in there and we shot people who were criminals in the way, like they always say. And then you get the person that was receiving the violence, and they're completely giving us a full picture of what was happening. Women and children running, men lying in the streets. They're set out to starve in the cold. And that was at the same time they're giving their opinions. Yes, go ahead.
So that part killed me. That one sentence. The Negroes appeared to turn primal. It seems like the white people were being primal at that moment, but like it's just such it's not just a little changing. It's a 180 of how it actually was. It's not just a little bit of changing the words, a little bit of, it's complete opposite things.
Right.
Yeah, the United States is one of the best marketeers of the world. they market things the way they want it. And it's like, even the marketing, come to the United States and get the white picket fence in the house. Well, most people here can't get that. And then they may, or we are the greatest nation. You go anywhere else, you're unsafe. Well, actually, you go anywhere else, you got less chance of getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
But they're doing it. It's a great marketing campaign, a great experience. They call it the United States. We're the greatest country in the world. Well, why would you say that when you were one of the last to end slavery? Europe ended slavery way before we did, and they were embargoing you to stop it. So I don't know. It's just a great marketing campaign, as far as I can tell.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Right. Agree with both of you guys. Good. Okay. And continue to add in. So on page 30, we'll just jump over a little bit. It speaks about what I said previously about the count of deaths that were happening. So the second paragraph says, no one knew how many Negroes were killed during the massacre. The New York Times, and I just like that the New York Times is in there because we still have that around today. So the New York Times put the death toll at 9. Waddell, writing in his memoirs, estimated about 20 black casualties. Others put the number at 90. Harry Hayden reported that some of his white sources boasted that they had killed over 100 black folks. So if they're saying they killed over 100 black folks, but the New York Times is only reporting 9 people, and then you have Harry Hayden saying, oh, well, it was just about 90. You can clearly see the discrepancy between those numbers. Yeah. And then it goes on to say, echoing the oral traditions of grandparents and generation, some African Americans in Wilmington believe an honest body count exceeded 300. So I actually would take the people who were subjected to the crime and subjected to the victims' violence. I would take their word for it and not the people who felt that they were in all legal parameters to take these drastic measures and massacre people just because they held office. And again, we already stated, though, it was a biracial office, so it wasn't even all black. Not that gave any reason either, but it was biracial, and it was voted upon. So they overthrew this biracial office, black and white, but then they massacred all the black people. So it says also, by nightfall, shooting had mostly subsided, with the streets dotted with fallen blacks. An ambulance from the hospital drove through Brooklyn and examined the fallen for signs of life. Survivors were taken to the hospital, but most wounded men who had sought safety under buildings died. So they're not even taking into account the people who had to run and hide and died under these buildings in the cold and starved. Okay. And then we'll kind of jump over. Let's see. There was a conversation that was being had. I just wanted to get that. Okay, so at the bottom of page 30, I believe it's still showing 30 for me. The bottom of page 30 is the paragraph that starts off with "at this juncture," but the last sentence in that paragraph, okay, it says, white leaders gave other affluent middle-class blacks 12 hours to get out of town. Ministers of several denominations called a meeting of the ministers to voice their protest over the banishment. Mr. J. Allen Taylor addressed the ministers, telling them exactly what had been done and what the white leaders further proposed to do in connection with both white and black agitators. But that is not legal, 2 clergymen protested. Of course it's not legal. Nothing is legal here just now. That is exactly what we are trying to establish: legal, orderly, and respectable government, Mr. Taylor replied. So they're in church talking about this, is what I'm trying to point out. They're in church talking about this and trying to make the massacre legal because they don't think that a biracial elected office of Republicans at the time, remember they were reversed, they don't think they're good enough. They think that they should not be in power. So they're in church saying that we're trying to make this legal. We know it's not legal. We know we're killing them, but we're trying to make this legal in church. I thought that was interesting. And then it goes on also say, when the clergy learned the coup was being directed by substantial citizens, they withheld their opposition. So the church didn't even interject in this situation that was happening. And at a time, too, I know that a lot of African Americans, even to this day, hold the church in high honor. But churches that wants to give them credit used to help us escape slavery. They weren't on the same side of the oppressor. But at this time, and those were black churches to be exact, in certain families. But at this time, they had no opposition to it. And remember, this is in 1898. So then if we skip on down, no, we'll read that paragraph too. So it says on November 11th, a military parade of 5 companies marched throughout Wilmington, displaying the 2 rapid fire guns. 2 days later, the white Christians of Wilmington attended church services where many ministers voiced support for the coup and congratulated the leaders. The Reverend J.W. Kramer declared that the mobs in the streets had been doing God's service. At First Baptist Church, congregants heard the Reverend Calvin S. Blackwell compare the victory of white supremacy to the triumph of the Lord and his heavenly host over Satan and his black-robed angels. He dismissed the killings as a mere incident and observed without much originality that, quote, you cannot make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. The primary purpose was to kill, but to educate. Ever the propaganda machine, newspapers reprinted excerpts of sermons by prominent ministers with themes of redemption of the city, victory, and duty. So that was their quote. You cannot make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And the primary purpose was to kill, but to educate. So kill them and educate the rest of the blacks, basically to fall in line, or this will happen to you too. And so we'll end with the conclusion, of course. It's on part 1. We won't read it all. I have a few things highlighted. Let's see if I can jump over. So just where we're at in Wilmington at that time, in the election, it starts off on page 31, part 1, conclusion. In the election of 1898, the Democratic Party was in control of the state legislature. However, control of Wilmington city government was still in the hands of Republican Party. And remember, they were reversed at that time and should have remained that way until the next election. Unwillingly to wait, Wilmington's Democrats stage a coup d'etat to retake the city's offices, citing an ineffectual leadership, corrupt officials, and soaring crime. The men justified their actions as for greater good of Wilmington society. They were also under a great deal of pressure because the taking of Wilmington became the state testing ground for putting an end to Negro domination. And that's what I wanted to point out, that this was the precursor for most of the violence that occurred after the Emancipation Proclamation. And that was their whole point, to make a stance for the rest of the country. And then a question I'll leave you guys with, we'll go a little bit more, but the question is good on page 31. Second paragraph. Why the Wilmington race riot of November 10th, 1898 must be seen as a coup d'etat is because it was planned and successful overthrow of a constituted biracial government on November 10th. White leaders of Wilmington successfully manipulated the masses into open warfare, and white Democratic leaders ruled the city via paramilitary force immediately following the violence. On November 12th, Waddell's cabinet met and selected 37 men to serve as a temporary policeman. For 30 days, in support of the 37 policemen, young men and boys were considered too young to be carrying guns, routinely searched blacks regardless of their age or their sex. And then if you guys want to jump in, feel free, and I'll kind of... Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I said a precursor, well, not really a precursor. This was the slave catchers stop and frisk. Show me your papers. That's what they intended with.
Yes. And then just to refer to some of the black-owned businesses, so I won't read it, but roughly the black-owned businesses became only to those areas that were black people in there. Remember, they were kind of, they were biracial, so it was mixed in Wilmington. Everybody had businesses, but blacks were still doing well as the whites at that time, the Republican whites at that time. But in 1897, black-owned businesses were located downtown and intermixed with white-owned businesses. By the 1900s, and remember the race riot, the Wilmington coup d'etat was 1898. So by the 1900s, black businesses had become concentrated in black neighborhoods. In 1897, there were 76 black businesses located along the street in the city's central business district. By the 1900s, the number was down to 33. The city itself became more segregated, with formerly mixed neighborhoods becoming predominantly black or white. So they made them segregated. It talks about the segregation that happened in the workforce, being able to go use the same water fountains. All of those things that we know of that happened to black people were happening at this time. On page 32, it just says the white supremacy campaign, the Negro mass exodus, and the hiring practices which favored whites caused a downturn in black employment. We still see that today with them always trying to push different bills. And what was it that you said they messed up on? The affirmative action bill. So we even see those two, those hiring practices and those entry practices that are still trying to harm blacks from being able to take certain positions in employment and higher offices, right? And then where did I want to jump? Okay, here we go. So on page 33, it reads that Wilmington's race riot marked a new epoch in the history of violent race relations in the U.S. Several other high-profile riots followed the model set by Wilmington, most notably Atlanta, 1906, Tulsa, 1921, and Rosewood, 1923. All four communities dealt with the aftermath of their riots differently, although whites in Tulsa and Atlanta addressed the violence, murderers, and property destruction soon after the riots. Wilmington whites provided compensation only for the loss of the building housing Manly Press. And that was the man we talked about who wrote that article and owned the only most successful black newspaper in Wilmington, that they burned down his building. And then on page 33, it says, last paragraph, last sentence, as Wilmington society grew more segregated, 1898 became an enduring example to black families how far white society could go to achieve its end. And then that is it. We'll kind of end there. I did want to read this moving forward together. It was an epilogue, and this is what the city kind of came up with, I believe. Yeah. Of how they're going to move forward. So it says, moving forward together to tell the story of 1898 and make the real history known, which is why we are the Real Book Club, bringing the history back to light and out of the darkness. It says to heal the wounds of the racial division which continue in the city, to honor the memory of those who lost lives and property in 1898, and to restore the hope through the efforts to foster economic inclusion. And then, yeah, so we'll kind of end there. It was one more highlight, page 33. Let's see, do I have time? Yes, last sentence on page 33, it still shows. So for me, it's the that second paragraph, last sentence, it was determined. So it says, it was determined the goal should be to tell the story of the 1898 coup and violence. Out of these early talks grew the 1898 Centennial Foundation. And that foundation came up with the moving forward together phrase. They created a workshop on race relations for community leaders in the government, for education, and for businesses. It also sponsored a lecture series that paired academic and local historians at several venues within the community, and they laid plans as well for the Wilmington in black and white. It was a series of public presentations paired black and white local leaders on the current state of race relations in the city. And so you get a little excerpt of the moving forward together. There was a monument also created by Ayo Kunoli Adeleye. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it was a memorial created. There was some controversy with the memorial because it felt that, see if I can pull that out real quick. Okay, so on page 34, they had some concerns with the memorial when they created it. It left off with these waters, these poles and waters. You can read about that on 33 and 34, but it left off with water and a paddle due to the spiritual belief of African Americans, the system of people from the African continent, so that water that keeps flowing. So on page 34, it just talks about the disconnection of the memorial, which is, it's pretty, okay, so it's something to note. So as noted by architectural historians Dale Upton, chair of the Department of Art History at University of California, Los Angeles, some may be perplexed by the memorial because, quote, there seems to be a disconnection between the events and the commemoration. Many of the black Wilmington residents who suffered in 1898 were targeted because they had achieved political and economic success in the post-Civil War Wilmington, yet they are represented here by an essentialized Africanist that is eerily similar to the stereotype portrayals of blacks that were used to justify the riot. So while Wilmington Monument escapes the traditional Euro-American monumental vocabulary, its creators seem to have settled for a kind of cultural stereotype rather than confronting the difficult task of commenting metaphorically on the events of 1898. So sometimes that happens too with these monuments. They want us all to have all this peace and show that we're still united and America's the great country that we are now. And that monument is caused a little bit of controversy. So we are R3, Real Eyes, Real Lives, Real Lives. We promote knowledge of self through education and activism. What better way to do that than to read? You have just heard us sum up the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina Coup d'Etat by David B. McCoy. Excellent book. If you haven't read it, you should get it. I'm going to pass it over to our hostess with the mostest.